I'm a 35-year-old guy married to my wife, Sarah, for about 5 years. Things have been great between us, and we've always been close with my family, especially my younger brother, Liam, who's 31. Recently, Liam got engaged to his fiancée, Mia, and of course, we were thrilled for them. I always thought Sarah got along with my family well enough, nothing major that stood out, but then something happened that completely blindsided me. A few weeks ago, I received an invitation to Liam and Mia's wedding. Naturally, I was excited. I'd been looking forward to the wedding, celebrating with family, catching up with everyone, and supporting Liam on his big day. The invitation itself was beautiful, one of those elegant cards with gold trim that immediately screams, formal event. When I opened it, I was expecting to see both Sarah's and my name, but nope, just mine. I double-checked to make sure it wasn't a mistake, but it was clear, the invite was only for me. No mention of Sarah at all. At first, I assumed it had to be some kind of oversight, maybe a mix-up or a guest list issue. I didn't mention it to Sarah right away because I didn't want to upset her if it was just an error. Instead, I decided to quietly figure out what was going on. I called my mom, assuming she'd have some insight. We're pretty close, so I thought she'd clear it up quickly. But when I asked her, she hesitated. It wasn't a long pause, but enough to make me feel uneasy. Then she gave me this vague explanation about Liam and Mia trying to keep the guest list small and that +1s were being excluded. Her response felt off, though, too casual, like she was trying to downplay something. It didn't sit right with me, but I decided to drop it for the moment. I convinced myself I might be reading too much into it and told myself I'd deal with it later. In hindsight, I should have trusted my gut. Later, turned out to be a much bigger issue. Eventually, I had to tell Sarah about the invitation. I didn't want to hide it from her, and I knew she'd notice something was wrong if I didn't mention it. When I told her, she took it hard, way harder than I expected. Sarah has always been very family-oriented, and ever since we got married, we've attended every family event together. Not being invited to Liam's wedding felt deeply personal to her, as though she'd been intentionally left out. She tried to brush it off like it didn't bother her, but I could tell she was hurt. I kept reassuring her that it was probably a mistake and that I'd figure it out, but the more I thought about it, the more unsettled I felt. Something about the whole situation just didn't add up. I decided to text Liam casually, something along the lines of, "Hey man, just got your invite. Wanted to check about Sarah's, wasn't sure if hers was separate or something." I didn't want to come across as confrontational, especially if it was just a misunderstanding. But to my surprise, Liam didn't respond. That was weird because we talk all the time. A day or two passed without a word from him, and this growing knot of anxiety settled in my stomach. I tried not to let it show in front of Sarah, but I knew something was off. The following weekend, we had a family barbecue at my cousin's place. I figured I'd see Liam there, and maybe I could talk to him in person. At the very least, I hoped someone would bring up the wedding so I could get a better understanding of what was going on. During the barbecue, I overheard my cousin chatting with someone about Liam and Mia's wedding guest list and how strict they were being about who got invited. I wasn't paying much attention until someone else chimed in, mentioning that everyone's significant others were invited, except Sarah. That was it. The gnawing feeling in my gut was back with a vengeance. This wasn't some mistake, it was deliberate. I decided it was time to have a serious talk with my parents. If they knew what was going on, they were either covering for Liam or didn't think it was important enough to tell me. Later that day, I pulled them aside and asked them directly why Sarah wasn't invited. My dad brushed it off like it wasn't a big deal, but my mom? She couldn't even meet my eyes. She kept saying things like, "It's just one day," and "We don't want any drama before the wedding." That's when it hit me, there was more to this, and they were keeping something from me. That night, Sarah asked me outright what was going on with the wedding invite. I couldn't lie to her. I told her what I'd overheard at the barbecue and that Liam still hadn't responded to my text. She was visibly upset, not just hurt but feeling singled out, like she'd done something to deserve being excluded. I didn't have any answers for her. The more I thought about it, the more I started feeling like I was missing something significant. Sarah wondered if it had anything to do with a minor disagreement she'd had with my mom a while back, but that seemed so trivial compared to what was happening now. Nothing about the situation made sense. It was wearing on both of us, and I realized I couldn't just let it go. I needed to confront Liam directly. This wasn't just about the wedding anymore, it felt like there was something bigger at play, and I had to get to the bottom of it before it caused even more damage. Update 1. I decided I couldn't wait any longer and reached out to Liam directly. I texted him, asking if we could meet up to discuss the wedding and why Sarah wasn't invited. After a few hours without a response, he finally replied, agreeing to meet later that week. He said he'd bring Mia along too, which I was fine with. I wanted to hear her perspective as well. I told Sarah about the plan, assuring her I'd get to the bottom of this and fight for her inclusion. She looked worried but nodded, clearly hoping I could resolve things. She didn't want to go herself, and I didn't push her. When I arrived at the restaurant, Liam and Mia were already there, seated in a corner booth. The atmosphere was tense right from the start. Mia sat stiffly with her arms crossed, and Liam looked visibly uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. There wasn't much small talk, we all knew why we were there. I didn't waste time. I asked them directly why Sarah wasn't invited to the wedding. I wasn't interested in excuses, I wanted an honest answer. Liam shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but it was Mia who spoke first. She bluntly said she didn't feel comfortable having Sarah at the wedding. Her tone was cold and rehearsed, like she'd been preparing this explanation for a while. I was stunned. I'd expected something about guest list constraints or a misunderstanding, but this was different. I pressed her for more details, and that's when she dropped the bombshell. According to Mia, Sarah had made offensive comments at a family gathering last year. She claimed Sarah had implied Mia wasn't good enough for Liam and made snide remarks about their relationship. I was floored. That didn't sound like Sarah at all. I asked for specifics, and Mia mentioned a barbecue we'd attended as a family. I tried to recall that day, but nothing came to mind that aligned with Mia's accusations. From what I remembered, everyone had gotten along fine. Mia, however, was adamant. She said the comments had stuck with her and that she didn't want negative energy at her wedding. She was afraid Sarah's presence might cause tension and ruin her special day. I turned to Liam, hoping he'd step in or clarify, but he still hadn't said a word. That's when it really hit me, he was siding with Mia on this. I asked Liam directly if he agreed with what Mia was saying. He finally spoke, but his answer wasn't what I wanted to hear. He said that while he didn't fully agree with Mia's interpretation of events, he needed to support her, especially on their wedding day. He kept emphasizing that it was her day, as if that justified excluding my wife. It felt like a punch to the gut. My own brother was okay with this? It felt like a betrayal. I told them both I thought they were blowing things out of proportion. If Sarah had said something, it was probably a misunderstanding or taken out of context. Mia wasn't having it. She doubled down, insisting she didn't want to risk any drama at her wedding. Things started getting heated. My frustration boiled over, and I accused Mia of holding onto a grudge over something trivial. I could feel my voice rising as I tried to defend Sarah, but Mia remained unmoved, and Liam just sat there, silent and complicit. I left the meeting feeling more hurt and confused than ever. This wasn't just about the wedding anymore, it felt like a fracture in my relationship with my brother. I didn't know how I was going to break this to Sarah, but one thing was clear, this wasn't over. Update 2. The next few days were absolute hell. I couldn't stop obsessing over the wedding. On one hand, it was my brother Liam's big day, something I had been looking forward to for months. But on the other hand, how could I go when Sarah, my wife, was being so deliberately excluded? The thought of showing up without her, knowing how hurt she was, didn't sit right with me. It felt like a betrayal. I needed clarity, so I called my best friend, Ryan. He's always been good at cutting through the noise and giving it to me straight. We met for a drink, and I laid everything out for him, the accusations, the exclusion, and how it was tearing Sarah and me apart. Ryan didn't sugarcoat his opinion. What Liam and Mia are doing is straight up wrong, he said. If you go to that wedding without Sarah, it's going to mess with your marriage. Skipping it is the only move. He was right. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Going to the wedding would send the message that I was okay with Sarah being excluded, and I wasn't, not even a little. Meanwhile, things at home were tense. Sarah was struggling, and one night, it all came to a head. I found her crying in the kitchen. She opened up, telling me how deeply hurt she felt, like she was being pushed out of my family. She said she was starting to wonder if I was really on her side. That crushed me. I knew this situation was hard, but seeing her like that, broken and questioning whether I had her back, pushed me to make a decision. The next morning, I sat Sarah down and told her I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to the wedding if she wasn't invited. I said it as clearly as I could so there would be no doubt. She looked relieved, but the hurt in her eyes didn't go away. This situation had already left a mark on both of us. Even though she appreciated that I was standing by her, the fact that we were even in this position hurt more than words could say. Now, I'm bracing for the fallout. I know my decision will upset Liam and Mia, and maybe even my parents. But I also know this, my marriage comes first. And if that means missing my brother's wedding, so be it.